All right, get ready. We're diving deep into your kidneys today. And wow, looks like you've been doing your homework. Lecture notes, encyclopedia entries, even a medical terminology guide.
Someone serious about renal physiology.
It's impressive. So what's got you digging into this whole filtration system of yours?
Well, it's one of those things we often take for granted, right? Until something goes wrong, and then suddenly it's all you can think about.
Isn't that the truth? Speaking of things that make you think, you've clearly marked that fact about how your kidneys filter your entire blood supply hundreds of times per day.
It's an incredible feat.
It really is. And to think, each kidney is about the size of your fist. You'd think for such a big job they'd be, well, bigger.
Right. Tiny but mighty, as they say, and tucked away back there in the retroperitoneal cavity.
Behind all those other organs, not exactly prime real estate.
Yeah. You'd think they'd get better placement with how hard they work. But that's the thing about the kidneys. Size is deceiving. You've got a note here about how they actually get even more blood flow than the brain.
More than the brain. Seriously, why is that?
Because those kidneys are working around the clock. They're like a non-stop 24/7 filtration plant, constantly working to keep everything in balance.
Which makes you realize that even a small bit of damage could really throw things off.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand how those millions of tiny nephrons actually work.
Okay, nephrons. Time to zoom in on those microscopic filtration squads. What are we looking at here?
Think of them like a super complex system of funnels and tubes.
Funnels and tubes.
Yeah, each with its own very important role to play. And the sheer volume of blood they process is amazing. Only about 20% of the plasma actually gets filtered each pass. Only 20%. So what happens to the other 80%?
It bypasses the filtration process and stays in the bloodstream. But get this, of the 20% that does get filtered, a whopping 99% of that is reabsorbed.
Whoa. That's some serious efficiency.
Right. It's all about maintaining that balance. You've got to get rid of the waste, but you don't want to lose those vital molecules either.
Yeah.
You've got some really detailed notes here about hydrostatic pressure and colloid osmotic pressure.
I do. I'm really curious about the nitty-gritty of how filtration actually happens at that molecular level.
It's fascinating. It's like this constant push and pull. So hydrostatic pressure from the blood, that's pushing fluid out.
Okay, so it's pushing it out. Got it.
Right. But at the same time, you've got colloid osmotic pressure from the proteins in the blood, and that's trying to pull fluid back in.
So it's like a tug of war. And maintaining that balance, that Goldilocks point, not too much, not too little, just the right amount of filtration, well, that's key.
Makes sense. But what about all that stuff dissolved in the blood? How do the kidneys know what to keep and what to toss out?
That's where our filtration barriers come in.
Filtration barriers.
Think of them like the bouncers at an exclusive club, the molecular kind. They're designed to let certain molecules through, the small ones, while keeping the larger ones out.
So like blood cells and most proteins.
Exactly. It's a very selective process.
Okay, so we've got this carefully filtered fluid, but then you said most of it gets reabsorbed. Where does that happen?
Well, your notes here mention the proximal convoluted tubule.
The PCT. Right.
You got it. The PCT is where the majority of reabsorption takes place. It's a very active process.
Active, so not just simple diffusion.
Nope. This is the real deal. We're talking specialized pumps, channels using energy to move molecules against their concentration gradients.
Wow, so they're really working for it.
They are. You've highlighted sodium, glucose, and water being reabsorbed here, all essential. But then there's urea.
Urea? I thought that was a waste product. Why would the body want to reabsorb that?
It's a great question, and it does seem counterintuitive, but reabsorbing some urea is actually crucial for creating that concentration gradient in the kidneys.
The concentration gradient.
Yeah, sometimes it's called the saline gradient, and it's this gradient that allows the kidneys to concentrate urine when you need to conserve water.
Wow, who knew urea had such an important job? So the PCT is all about reabsorption. What about our next stop? The loop of Henle. I have to say that U-shaped structure always reminds me of a roller coaster.
It may look like a roller coaster, but its function is all about fine-tuning the filtrate, particularly the water and salt concentration.
And this is where that counter-current multiplier system comes into play, right?
You know it.
Something tells me this is where things get really interesting.
That's good.
Like you've got a diagram here showing how water gets pulled out of the descending limb as it goes deeper into the medulla, that inner part of the kidney.
Right, and the deeper it goes, the saltier the surrounding tissue gets.
So it's osmosis in action, right? The water's moving to where there's more stuff, more salt, to balance things out.
Exactly. Water always wants to go where the party's at. More dissolved stuff, higher osmotic pressure.
So the filtrate gets more concentrated as it goes down. Then what? What happens in the ascending limb?
Okay, so the ascending limb is like, nope, party's over, water, you're cut off.
It just stops it.
Pretty much. It becomes impermeable to water. But here's the catch. It starts actively pumping out sodium chloride.
So it's like a one-way street for salt. Out, but no water allowed back in.
You got it. And that pumping action, it makes the surrounding tissue even saltier, which in turn pulls even more water out of that descending limb next door.
It's like it's a positive feedback loop, right?
Yep.
Constantly making that concentration gradient stronger.
You got it. A brilliant design, really. The structure of the loop of Henle is perfectly matched to its function.
Elegant, right. Okay, so we've got this super concentrated filtrate now. Where does it go next?
Next stop, the distal convoluted tubule, the DCT. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah, the DCT. That's where things get even more fine-tuned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't you say we have some hormonal activity there?
We do. You've highlighted parathyroid hormone, PTH.
Right, PTH. Always down for a good hormone chat. So how does PTH work its magic in the DCT?
Well, PTH is all about maintaining that critical calcium balance, right? So when those calcium levels start to drop, PTH swoops in and helps the DCT reabsorb more calcium from the filtrate.
Making sure the body holds on to this really important mineral.
Exactly. It's like the calcium conservation crew working hard.
Which makes a lot of sense, given how into bone health you are. Calcium is key for that.
Yeah.
But I also noticed you mentioned vitamin D in your notes, and, well, that threw me for a loop. I thought we were talking kidneys, not sunshine and milk.
Haha, right. But that's the amazing thing. These systems are way more interconnected than we realize. Sunshine might kickstart vitamin D production in the skin,
Okay.
but it's actually the kidneys that activate it into its most potent form, the form that can do its job properly.
No, the kidneys play a role in bone health, too. The list of their responsibilities is pretty impressive.
It really is.
But hold on, your notes also mentioned the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system happening here as a DCT, too.
You're on fire today, catching everything. Yes, the RAAS is active here as well.
Okay, now that one rings a bell, but I'm drawing a blank. What exactly does the RAAS do again?
Think of it like this. The DCT is like the grand central station of the nephron.
Busy place.
Super busy. Calcium regulation, vitamin D activation, and the RAAS all happening in this one tiny segment.
Wow. Okay, well, you've definitely piqued my curiosity with the RAAS. It sounds important.
It definitely is. But maybe we should save that adventure for our next stop.
You mean the collecting ducts?
You know it. The grand finale of our nephron tour.
After all, they are the last chance for water reabsorption. Before, well, you know.
Exactly. And the collecting ducts play a really crucial role in fine-tuning the final urine concentration based on how hydrated you are.
So, like, if you're dehydrated, the collecting ducts can reabsorb a lot of that water, right? Make your urine more concentrated.
You got it.
Like squeezing every last drop out of a sponge.
Perfect analogy. And this is where another hormonal superstar makes its grand entrance, antidiuretic hormone, ADH.
ADH. That sounds really familiar. Doesn't it have something to do with feeling thirsty? It does. It's like when your body senses you're running low on fluids.
It sends out the ADH signal.
Exactly. It's like red alert, conserve water, and those collecting ducts being the team players they are.
They jump right into action, reabsorbing as much water as they can.
Makes sense. Gotta keep that blood volume up. Okay, but before we wrap up this whole nephron adventure, we have to circle back to that RAAS thing, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. What's so special about it? Why did it make it into your notes?
Right. The RAAS, think of it like your body's emergency response team for when your blood pressure drops too low. You've got a note here about specialized cells in the kidneys called juxtaglomerular cells.
Juxtaglomerular cells.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're like the first responders. When they sense that blood pressure drop, they jump into action and release an enzyme called renin.
Renin.
Right.
That's what kicks off that whole domino effect, that cascade of events you were talking about.
Exactly. Renin acts on this protein, angiotensinogen, that's already circulating in the bloodstream.
Angiotensinogen. It rings a bell, but give me a refresher. What exactly is it?
Think of it like an inactive precursor just waiting to be transformed, and that's where renin comes in. It converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin the front.
Okay, so we've got angiotensin and now, then what?
Well, angiotensin the third is quickly converted to angiotensin the second, which is the real powerhouse of this whole system. Angiotensin the second, that's what's responsible for those blood pressure boosting effects.
Angiotensin the second. Okay, now that one I definitely remember. We talked about this before, didn't we? It's a vasoconstrictor, right?
You got it. You're on a roll today. Angiotensin the second acts directly on your blood vessels, makes them constrict.
So it's making those blood vessels narrower. which immediately increases blood pressure.
Precisely. But that's not all. It also stimulates the release of aldosterone from the adrenal glands.
Aldosterone, another hormone. And what does aldosterone do again?
Right, so aldosterone does most of its work in the kidneys, specifically those distal convoluted tubules and collecting ducts we were talking about.
Right, right.
And its main job, to increase sodium reabsorption.
So the body holds on to more sodium, which means it holds on to more water too. Because where salt goes, water follows.
Exactly. So more sodium reabsorption means increased blood volume, which also helps raise blood pressure. And just for good measure, angiotensin II also stimulates the release of our good friend, antidiuretic hormone.
ADH.
Yeah.
There it is again. It all comes back around, doesn't it?
Full circle. It's all connected.
Wow. So the RAS is like a three-pronged attack on low blood pressure. Constrict those vessels, boost that volume, and hold on to that water. That's incredible.
That's pretty amazing, right?
It is. But I did notice you said it can actually be a factor in hypertension if it gets out of control.
It's true. Like a lot of powerful systems in the body, it needs to be kept in check.
It makes you realize how important balance really is. Well, I gotta say, you've been an amazing guide on this incredible journey, from those tiny little nephrons filtering away to the RAS swinging into action. It's amazing how much is going on in there without us even realizing it.
It really makes you appreciate the incredible efficiency of the human body.
It does. And all thanks to you, I think I'll be looking at my next glass of water a bit differently. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. You've given me a lot to think about.